Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. It is July 16th, 2025. Let's talk boxing. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let me also point out, too, I've done some videos here online where I've talked about AI. Folks, in back of me is an AI picture from several months ago. Several months, right? And just understand, this technology is dated. In time, you're going to have moving pictures in back of these YouTubers, right? Just food for thought. Just understand, the game has changed immensely. Let's talk boxing. You know, let's remember, let's be clear, they have weight classes for a reason. You might recall seeing Roy Jones in the ring with Mike Tyson just a few years ago in a heavyweight fight. You might also realize that Roy Jones at one point was a heavyweight champion, right? So all of these Roy Jones comments where he's prepared to fight welterweight, junior middleweight Floyd Mayweather in a street fight or otherwise are simply ridiculous. I mean, guys, let's face it. We all know boxing. I don't expect Larry Holmes to suddenly start calling out Ray Leonard. It wouldn't make sense. Roy Jones calling out Floyd doesn't make any sense. I understand the guys are trash talking. I understand to be a great athlete requires self-belief, ego, competitiveness. We get all of that, right? But let's be real here, guys. They're not the same weight class, right? A street fight would serve what purpose? Not only that, you could have been a great fighter. I mean, a spectacular fighter in your prime, right? Joe Louis. And the bottom line is, we all age differently. We all take fitness differently. You look at some of these older fighters and you think, wow, this guy knows his way around a barbecue, right? A fight today doesn't prove who would win in their prime if they were the same weight class. Some guys are hitting the gym, you can tell. Some guys don't know where the gym is. They put in their time. Right? They look back on their youth and they think to themselves, wow, I'm not doing that again. Right? So, for every fighter who wants to come back in their 50s, right? Shannon Briggs, for example. There are a bunch of fighters who have no desire to come back right now. Right? They, aren't in shape to come back. They understand the prime version of themselves would decimate them today. Calling them out proves absolutely nothing. Now let's start speculating here. That's really what it is. Who was better when they were at their absolute best? Roy Jones or Floyd Mayweather? Right? And let me just say, I have to add this. Ray Leonard, of course, is talking about the Four Kings. The reason why we're talking about the Four Kings is simply because Marvin Hagler's no longer with us. Ray Leonard's in the latter part of his 60s. Right? Nobody lives forever. Years ago, we were talking about heavyweights in the 1970s. Why? Because, Joe Frazier wasn't in the best of health. He's no longer with us. Ali wasn't in the best of health. Guys were passing from that era, right? Ron Lyle is no longer with us. Ernie Shavers is no longer with us. Countless others. Folks, understand this is a rolling phenomenon. In a few years, we're going to be talking about, fighters from the 90s. Then we're going to be talking about fighters from the O's, right? Because as older people age and they see their own mortality in front of them, they start remembering the great fights they had. They start getting honest with the public, right? Ray Leonard admits that he lost that Hearns rematch. Right? We start hearing stories we didn't know before, right? Joe Frazier, blind in one eye. Couldn't get licensed, but had a hookup in some places. Now we're starting to figure out why, that Thrilla in Manila was in Manila, not the United States. Now we're figuring out why the first Frazier-Ali fight wasn't at Jack Kent Cooke's Fabulous Forum. Even though Jack Kent Cooke was involved with the fight, no, it happened in Madison Square Garden because Frazier had a hookup. So understand, there's a timing element, right? As people are still with us, we start looking at their era. So, right, let me just say, we're talking a lot about the Four Kings. Ray Leonard said he doesn't believe Floyd Mayweather beats any of the Four Kings. Folks, you're kidding yourselves. I mean, let me just say this. First, the Four Kings really are a bigger group than that. Wasn't that Iran Barkley, who beat Thomas Hearns twice? Wasn't that Iran Barkley, who had an excellent fight against Roberto Duran, right? Duran brings his A game that fight. That's why Duran wins the fight, right? Understand, too, the Four Kings, it's not like all four were in their prime at the same time. Talk to boxing historians. They'll flatly tell you that Roberto Duran was one of the best lightweights in history. Right? Let me point out, from this seat, I think Shane Mosley is one of the best lightweights in history. Understand, Duran, of course, gained weight as he got older. Happens to a lot of us. Right? Ends up fighting, the best at 147. Right? So he's named in the Four Kings. It's not like Ray Leonard is one of the best lightweights ever. Right? Understand, Duran is literally fighting him. Think about it. Lightweight's 135. Duran, who did get blown out by Thomas Hearns. Right? Duran ends up fighting Hagler at middleweight. 160. That fight goes the distance, and back then the distance was 15 rounds. What's a lightweight doing going the distance against Marvin Hagler, of all people? Right? So, folks, hey, I'm glad the guys are getting a victory lap, but let's not kidding ourselves. Floyd Mayweather had better defense than all of the Four Kings. Just food for thought. Let me say this, too. I was a young kid. I was watching TV. There was a guy named Kirkland Lang. Look up his name. Folks, he undressed Duran in a fight. Styles make fights. Duran had no clue how to fight Kirkland Lang, just like he had no clue how to fight Thomas the Hitman Hearns. Right? But Duran was a guy who kept fighting tough guys. He beat Davey Moore. Right? You can believe that it's legit. You can believe that a thumb was involved. But let's just say Duran, of course, had his ups and downs during the decade. Right? We look back on these guys, we don't realize that Kevin Howard drops Ray Leonard. Right? Ray was winning the fight. Ray got off the canvas. Ray won the fight. But just understand, all of these guys had problems. Juan Rodan dropped Marvin Hagler. Right? So, Iran Blade Barkley dropped Thomas Hearns in their first fight. Beats him by decision in the second fight. So let's talk about Roy Jones and Floyd. I do have an opinion on this, and I'll just say this politely. I was watching the baseball All-Star game just a few days ago, and I was looking at Paul Skynes, pitcher, Pittsburgh Pirates. I have no idea. I have no idea whether Paul Skynes, who has great numbers, who in his young career has started 2 All-Star games, but I have no idea whether he knows how to pitch. Right? Let's say I'm looking at him and I don't feel I'm watching Greg Maddux, a guy who could throw changeups at you on 3-2 counts. But the one thing I know is that Paul Skynes, young guy, has an arm that gets the ball over the plate at 100 miles an hour. He doesn't have to know how to pitch, particularly not in an All-Star game. This is a guy who's blessed, right? He's 6-something, right? He's a tall dude. He throws incredibly hard. He doesn't need much of a wind-up. His fastball moves, right? We're not going to find out whether he knows how to pitch until that fastball loses a few miles per hour. He is one of the best pitchers in baseball right now. Roy Jones, I'm not sure if young Roy knew what he was doing. Both Mayweather and Jones were freak athletes. Right? I will say this. I have not seen the fighter go through the level of opposition that Roy Jones in his prime went through and win by the margins Roy Jones won by. Right? I'm just going to name some names. Bernard Hopkins. Right, folks? Hopkins was an up-and-comer at the time, but you sensed that Hopkins was good. You sensed it. And Roy Jones beat him by a few rounds. Mike McCallum. Understand, McCallum beat an unbeaten Hawk. Julian Jackson. Right? He beat an unbeaten Julian Jackson. McCallum was known as the body snatcher. Now, truth be told, McCallum was a little bit older when he fought Roy Jones. But folks, Jones beats him by a margin. Right? This is back when McCallum was giving James Toney problems. Virgil Hill. Folks, there's only one Virgil Hill fight I know of where Virgil Hill gets hit with a body shot and can't continue. And that was against Roy Jones. And I didn't consider Jones to be that great a body puncher. James Toney. Folks, my feelings on James Toney. James Toney's one of the best fighters I've ever seen. Freddie Roach is on record as saying the most talented fighter he trained. This is a guy who trained Cotto, Hall of Famer, Manny Pacquiao, Hall of Famer. Freddie Roach is on record as saying James Toney is the most talented fighter he's trained. I've seen Evander Holyfield against Tyson more than once. Against Lennox Lewis more than once. Against Riddick Bowe more than twice. I've never seen Evander look worse than he did against James Toney, and James Toney standing in the pocket. He's not even running away from Evander Holyfield. The Roy Jones-James Toney fight was not close. Right? And so let's just say Prime Jones was absurd. Even the John Ruiz fight at heavyweight. Understand, Ruiz gave Holyfield all he could handle. Right? Roy Jones looked qualitatively faster. Qualitatively faster than John Ruiz. Right? And, you saw Roy at the weigh-in, and let's just say Roy's wearing clothes. There is no way Roy weighed what he weighed that night at the weigh-in. That day at the weigh-in for that heavyweight title fight. So I'll say this. Mayweather, by contrast, always knew what he was doing. Mayweather was advanced when he was young. One of the best fights, commentated fights I've ever seen was Mayweather against Renato Hernandez. Folks, it's on YouTube. One of the guys who's doing the commentary is George Foreman. And Foreman is pointing out to you as the fight goes forward how Mayweather is stepping out of the pocket and then stepping back in the pocket. Right? People don't realize that, Foreman's fight style wasn't the only thing Foreman knew about boxing. Just like Mike Tyson is an excellent commentator, right? These guys actually know parts of the sport that are outside of how they participated in the sport from a style perspective, right? We know Foreman is a guy in the pocket blowing you out. He was completely appreciative of Mayweather's defense, of Mayweather's movement. And keep in mind, Mayweather was the challenger. That's how Mayweather got his title, right? So I'll say this. If I had to say who was the best in their prime, who hit the highest level, I'd say the Roy Jones who beat Mike McCallum, right? Both guys, freak athlete. Jones also had another fight that's preposterous. He fought Vinny Pazienza. I believe Vinny's in the Hall of Fame now. Understand, I believe that's one of the few times in history, in fact, might be the only time in history, where there's a round in the fight where 3 minutes go by and Pazienza does not land a punch on Roy Jones. Right? Jones was preposterous. Right? But I'll say there's not a day. While Jones, when he was just being an athlete in the ring, phenomenal. But there's not a day in Roy Jones's career, in my opinion, when Floyd was actually boxing. Again, there's a time gap, right? Jones is 88 Olympics. Mayweather's the Atlanta Olympics. There's not a time, there's not a day when they overlap where Roy Jones is in the ballpark of Floyd's defense. Right? Floyd's wearing body armor. Jones was, fast twitch, feint, stay outside. He'd make you throw punches. He'd just back away from them. He's straight out of the Matrix back then. Mayweather's different. Mayweather could be right in front of you. You throw on him, Mayweather catches the punch. Mayweather has a hand up. Mayweather could, have the punch bounce off his defensive construct and then come back and hit you hard. There's a scene in the Oscar De La Hoya fight, and understand, Mayweather's outweighed in that fight. It wasn't Mayweather's weight class. And there's a moment where Oscar De La Hoya, who had a punch, gets Mayweather over by the ropes, and Floyd stays there. And he has his defensive construct up. Folks, it's watertight. Right? De La Hoya, whose hand speed, I know he lost the fight, okay, fine. But his hand speed was too fast for Felix Trinidad, as was Jones's, by the way, later. But Oscar had fast hands. He could not get through Mayweather's defense, and Mayweather was a smaller man. Right? So, folks, it's close, but just like I'm here and I say, look, the best heavyweight I've seen, I know of on film, I was too young at the time, is Ali against Cleveland Williams. Yes, Cleveland Williams had been shot by a .357 Magnum, if you know the full story. He's not quite the Cleveland Williams who breaks Sonny Liston's rib. Sonny's bluffing in one of those fights. Um, but let's just say that Ali, even though I think Larry Holmes overall is a better heavyweight, that Ali is, if you said, who's the heavyweight who hit the highest level, I'd say Ali against Cleveland Williams. Right? The whole thing is there. The speed, the power. Cleveland Williams is getting knocked down. Right? The timing. It's all there. Right? Roy Jones, when he was fighting McCallum and Virgil Hill and Hopkins, the first Hopkins fight, not the second, it's all there. Right? You understood, this guy's like Paul Skynes. Where you see him, I'm watching an all-star game where guys are throwing hard, and in that game, this guy just seems to be throwing harder than everyone else. Right? You see him and you understand, wow, this guy is in a spot in his career where he's almost unhittable. Right? Roy Jones got to that spot. Let's talk about some other boxing news. No one has changed the trajectory of their career more this year than Shakur Stevenson. Right? I saw the Williams Zepeda fight. I thought it was competitive. You, the public, don't. Right? You, the public, firmly believe that Shakur Stevenson, who already was viewed as highly skilled, took his game to some place that's special. In other words, just understand, Shakur Stevenson right now is viewed as special, and we have proof. William Zepeda's lone loss. So now we're hearing that a fight's being considered. And to me, this is overdue. Not the opponent, but the idea of Stevenson moving up in weight. Like, by the way, Ezzard Charles did. Right? And Charles, a small heavyweight, beats Joe Louis. Comes the closest to beating Rocky Marciano. Right? He opens a cut on Marciano's nose. The referee tells Marciano, Rocky, if, this is the last round. I'm not going to let this go further because the cut was a nasty cut that threatened to spread all the way up Marciano's nose, and Marciano gets the stoppage. Right? Ezzard Charles comes that close to beating Marciano and Joe Louis. Right? And of course, we can talk about the fight in, I believe it was Pittsburgh, involving Jersey Joe Walcott, who himself, becomes champion. Just realize that, Ezzard Charles did beat Walcott. That series had moments for both men. Right? Well, Shakur Stevenson's being discussed now for a fight in the United Kingdom. Ground zero for boxing, in my opinion, against Conor Benn. Right, folks? My goodness, who thought this one up? 5 stars from me. Right? Shakur Stevenson has one of boxing's best straight lefts. He's southpaw. Manny Pacquiao is trying to get a title. Understand how preposterous the sport of boxing is. Right? If Manny Pacquiao beats Mario Barrios, he would have a title if he gets his dream opponent, Floyd Mayweather. And I hope Mayweather stays retired. But if he gets Mayweather for his rematch, that's what Manny wants. I have no doubt that Mayweather would be granted the same consideration that Pacquiao, who hasn't fought for years but yet is fighting for a title, has been granted. Understand, Pacquiao Mayweather 2 conceivably would be for a welterweight title. Well, let me say this. Pacquiao, one of the best punches in boxing. Pacquiao straight left. Right? Can he pull it off against southpaw Shakur Stevenson? Right? Who, would be throwing his own straight left. Right? I think that's a fascinating fight. First, Stevenson, to prove viability at 147, would have to get by Conor Benn. That's an interesting fight because William Zepeda is constant pressure. He's front foot pressure all the time. Conor Benn at his best is an ambush fighter. He's episodic. Right? Look at the Chris Algieri fight. Conor Benn's outside, then he shows up. He's Freddy Krueger. Suddenly he shows up at your door throwing hard shots. I thought Shakur Stevenson had problems with Zepeda's aggressiveness early in that fight. In fact, the first half of the fight. I thought Zepeda is in Shakur Stevenson's face. Stevenson couldn't dislodge him. Stevenson, with his back up against the ropes, looked confused. Zepeda started throwing body shots. Stevenson looked befuddled. Right? The problem is you knew Zepeda was going to be right in front of Stevenson. Now, I'm not saying Conor Benn has an advanced back foot. He doesn't. Right? But Conor Benn does have a suddenness to him. And that suddenness could throw off Shakur Stevenson. So let's go one step further. There's a wild card. In fact, there are a couple at 147. Right? We simply don't know how good Brian Norman is. Right? That left hook looked tremendous, didn't it? For his fight in Asia. That left hook looked simply tremendous. But the Norman resume's thin. Right? Norman himself has an intriguing fight coming up. Let's just say it's stunning how Jaron Ennis left 147. And now suddenly it's a hot division. Also understand, Stevenson, again, southpaw. I don't think he moves as well as Sander Martin. Right? That's an advanced back foot. Right? Teofimo Lopez didn't look good against Sander Martin. Right? I wonder what happens if Teofimo's up at 147. He's a master in the pocket. Him against Stevenson in the pocket would be the stuff dreams are made of. Right? That's if a pocket is formed. Can Stevenson channel Jermaine Ortiz or Sander Martin? Be the southpaw with the advanced mobile back foot. Frustrating Teofimo. Let's just say the possibilities have just gotten off the page. Let me say something else too. And when we criticize fighters or challenge fighters, it's out of respect. Right now, I feel you just saw William Zepeda on his front foot. You saw that Stevenson eventually was able to get off the ropes. Stevenson in the middle of the ring was magnanimous. Right? You, the public, feel that the second half, at least, of that Zepeda fight showed a Stevenson who is among the very best in the sport. Now, let's just say 140. I feel Gary Antoine Russell, who's aggressive on his front foot. would give Stevenson a lot of issues. You know I like guys who can lean backward, right? You know I like guys who understand length. And you know I like guys who can set up a jab and dare you to get by it. Right, folks? Richardson Hitchens, remember that name? Has the kind of length. He has the title at 140, although Stevenson is in that Ray Leonard category these days, right? Where Stevenson can show up in your division and the judges are going to treat him like he has the belt, right? But, one wonders what would happen if Hitchens, who beat Paro, who beat Subiel Matias in Puerto Rico, right? Let's just say 140 has some players, right? You wonder what would happen if Stevenson were in against Richardson Hitchens, right? And Hitchens is throwing that jab, using his height, and, is wisely pacing himself. You saw that George Kambosos fight, right, folks? Hitchens just withers Kambosos, doesn't he? You're watching the fight. The jab was crisp. Kambosos looked outgunned rounds before it ended. It was a matter of time, right? The only person who was enduring a war of attrition in that match was Kambosos, right? And this is a guy who beat Teofimo. So Shakur, if he does pivot toward Conor Benn, would bypass 140. Just understand, I look at Richardson Hitchens, it's just a matter of time before he's at 147. Let's stop kidding ourselves, right? Jack Catterall's already at 147. Let's just say, let's keep an eye on the lay of the land. Let's recognize, though, that Shakur Stevenson holds a lot of keys from 135 to 147. In my eyes, if Manny Pacquiao beats Mario Barrios, the decision makes itself, right? Are there two faster southpaws than prime Pacquiao? We'll find out how removed from his prime he is. And Shakur Stevenson, right? If I'm Stevenson, if Pacquiao, beats Mario Barrios and calls me, I'm in the ring, right? I'm thinking this guy's 46 years old. I can't wait. If I'm going to fight Pacquiao, it's now or never. From the Pacquiao side of the ledger, just understand Pacquiao hits much harder than Shakur Stevenson. He has a suddenness that William Zepeda doesn't have, right? Stevenson, if you stay on his right side, stay away from his left at all costs. If you stay on his right side and you're ready for his right hook, you can do some things. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours. We'll find out who the guys fight. Leave your comments. Tell us how you think some fights roll out. Mario Barrios against 46-year-old Manny Pacquiao. Who wins that match? Right? Brian Norman's next fight. I'm not mentioning his opponent simply because I'm drawing a blank and it's a live video. You tell us who wins that fight. Right? Where does Jack Catterall go next? Is he going to fight a guy with a punch? What did we really learn from that last Jack Catterall fight? Is Catterall a player at 147 where things are hot? Let me also say this too, 154, I just have to mention it. Erickson Lubin, when he fought Jermell Charlo, I thought he was going to win the fight. That's how highly thought of Erickson Lubin was. When he fought Sebastian Fundora, right? Look at the scorecards. Even though he was getting his face rearranged, that fight's competitive. I mentioned Fundora because Murtazaliev, who might be the best in the division, is a tall guy. Right, folks, we're getting Murtazaliev against Erickson Lubin. Folks, that's a 5-star fight at 154. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comments section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.